The silence that descended upon Marsh Harbour on that humid August afternoon was deafening. Just moments earlier, a small Cessna 402B had taxied down the runway, its engines straining against a weight it was never meant to carry. The turquoise waters of the Bahamas were supposed to be the backdrop for a celebration of life, but in a heartbeat, they became a witness to tragedy. The aircraft lifted, wobbled precariously in the heavy air, and then, with a terrifying finality, plunged back to Earth just 200 feet from the runway. There were no sirens at first, only the crackle of flames and the paralyzed shock of onlookers who could not believe what they had just seen. Buried within the smoldering wreckage was not just a young woman, but a beacon of light for the music world. She was only 22, standing at the absolute pinnacle of her career, with blockbuster movies to film and songs waiting to be sung. The world knew her face, her signature style, and her angelic voice, but few knew the series of fateful decisions that led to this catastrophic moment. How does a star so bright vanish into the darkness of a swamp in the blink of an eye? This is the tragic story of Aaliyah, born in Brooklyn but forged in the gritty, soulful streets of Detroit. Aaliyah Dana Haughton was never an ordinary child. While other kids were playing in the yard, she was studying the greats, learning how to command a room not with volume, but with presence. Her mother, a vocalist herself, recognized the spark early on. By the age of 10, she was already standing on the stage at Star Search, a tiny figure with a voice that seemed years older than her smile. She lost that night, a moment that would have broken most children, but for her it was simply the first lesson in resilience. She dried her tears and vowed to return, not just as a contestant, but as a star. Her break came swiftly, guided by her uncle who was married to the legendary Gladys Knight. But the path to stardom led her into a storm that nearly consumed her before she could truly shine. At just 12 years old, she began working with R. Kelly, a rising force in R&B who became her mentor. The result was her debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. The music was undeniable, smooth, street smart, and incredibly catchy. It went platinum, and suddenly the teenage girl in the baggy jeans and sunglasses was the coolest face on MTV. However, the title of that album would soon take on a haunting, darker meaning. Whispers turned into headlines when a marriage certificate surfaced, alleging that a 15-year-old Aaliyah had secretly wed her 27-year-old mentor. The revelation sent shockwaves through the industry. It was a scandal that threatened to define her entire existence. She was a child thrust into an adult controversy, surrounded by cameras and questions no teenager should have to answer. Her family stepped in immediately to annul the marriage and sever ties, pulling her back to safety, but the damage to her public image was severe. Critics whispered that without her mentor, she was finished, a one-hit wonder destined to fade away in the shadow of scandal. They were wrong. They underestimated the quiet strength behind those dark sunglasses. Aaliyah did not hide, she evolved. Leaving the past behind, she sought a new sound, something that had never been heard before. She found it in a chaotic studio with two then unknown producers, Timbaland and Missy Elliott. It was a gamble. Their beats were stuttering and strange. Her voice was soft and falsetto. But when they combined, it was magic. The release of One in a Million wasn't just a comeback, it was a reinvention. She had walked through the fire of public scrutiny and emerged not as a victim, but as an icon in the making, ready to rewrite the rules of R&B. By the late 90s, Aaliyah was no longer just a singer. She had become a cultural phenomenon. She moved with a mysterious grace that set her apart from her peers. While other pop stars were fighting for attention with scandalous outfits, she captivated the world hiding behind dark shades, baggy Tommy Hilfiger jeans, and tight crop tops. She made tomboy chic the definitive look of a generation, proving that sex appeal didn't require revealing everything. Her music video for Try Again didn't just top the charts. It broke history, becoming the first song to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 based solely on radio airplay. She was unstoppable, a quiet storm that was slowly conquering every corner of the entertainment industry. Hollywood soon came calling, and unlike many musicians who struggle on the big screen, Aaliyah possessed a natural magnetic charisma. Her debut role in Romeo Must Die was a smash hit, showcasing not just her beauty, but her ability to hold her own in action sequences. The critics loved her, and the industry giants took notice. She had the world at her feet, having signed on to play the character Z in the upcoming sequels of The Matrix, a role that would have undoubtedly cemented her status as a global superstar. Scripts were piling up, endorsement deals were overflowing, and her third self-titled album was receiving critical acclaim for its mature experimental sound. But beyond the platinum records and red carpets, Aaliyah had found something even more precious. True love. Her relationship with Damon Dash, the hip-hop mogul, was the kind of romance that felt destined. They were inseparable, a power couple who seemed to understand each other in a way no one else could. Dash later revealed that they were not just dating, they were planning a future. They spoke of marriage, of building a family, and of growing old together away from the flashing lights. Friends described her during this time as radiating a newfound happiness, a piece that had been missing in her tumultuous teenage years. Everything was aligning perfectly. She was 22 years old, deeply in love, and professionally untouchable. She was preparing to fly to the Bahamas to film the music video for Rock the Boat, a visual that was meant to celebrate the sensual, relaxed vibe of her new music. It was supposed to be a routine trip, a quick work assignment in paradise before returning to the arms of the man she loved and the massive film projects waiting for her. No one could have imagined that this trip to the clear blue waters would be the final chapter of a fairy tale that was just getting started. The height of her flight was dizzying, but the ground was closer than anyone dared to fear. The crystal clear waters of the Bahamas, which had just served as the perfect backdrop for her latest masterpiece, quickly turned into a setting of impatience and fatal miscalculation. Filming for Rock the Boat had wrapped a day early, and the mood was celebratory. Aaliyah and her entourage were anxious to get back to the States. They were tired, they were happy, and they just wanted to go home. This desire to return to Miami that very evening, rather than waiting for the larger aircraft scheduled for the next day, was set in motion a chain of irreversible errors. A smaller twin-engine Cessna 42B was chartered at the last minute. When it arrived at the Marsh Harbour airport, it looked far too small for the 8 passengers and a mountain of heavy equipment, designer luggage, and crates they had with them. There was tension on the tarmac. Witnesses later reported seeing the pilot arguing, warning that there was too much weight for the small vessel to handle. But the pressure to leave was immense, and the urgency to return to their lives in America overrode caution. In the end, the warnings were ignored. Every bag was loaded, creating a deadly imbalance that doomed the flight before the engines even started. The investigation that followed would reveal truths that made the tragedy even more bitter to swallow. The pilot, Luis Morales III, was not even approved to fly that specific aircraft for the charter company. Worse, toxicology reports later found traces of cocaine and alcohol in his system. He was a man compromised, sitting at the controls of a machine that was overloaded by nearly 700 pounds and out of center of gravity. Aaliyah, sitting quietly in the cabin, likely had no idea that her safety was in the hands of such gross negligence. She was just a passenger, trusting that the professionals would bring her home. At approximately 6:50 p.m., the engines roared to life. The plane began its taxi, picking up speed down the short runway. It lifted off the ground, but it never truly found the air. It struggled, heavy and lethargic, fighting a gravity that it could not defeat. Witnesses watched in horror as the aircraft banked sharply to the left, stalled, and nosedived into the swampy vegetation just 200 feet from the end of the runway. The impact was violent and final. There was no time for goodbyes. There was time for fear to fully register. In a split second, twisted metal and fire claimed the lives of 9 people. Aaliyah was gone. The silence that followed the crash was heavier than the humid island air, marking the senseless end of a life that had so much more to give. The news didn't spread with the instant speed of a tweet back then. It traveled like a cold wave, chilling everyone it touched. It was a Sunday morning in America when the reality set in. Television screens across the country flashed the breaking news, and MTV, the network that had helped crown her a queen, went dark, suspending regular programming to play her videos on an endless, heartbreaking loop. For a generation of young Americans who had grown up watching her transform from a shy girl in baggy pants to a confident woman, it felt like losing a sister. The disbelief was universal. How could someone so full of life, someone who was just here, be gone? When her body was returned to New York City, the grief spilled out onto the streets of Manhattan. Was a scene usually reserved for his estate, not 22-year-old R&B singers A glass carriage drawn by two white horses carried her casket through the concrete canyons of the city. Inside, Aaliyah lay amongst silver roses, a sleeping beauty who would never wake. Thousands of fans lined the sidewalks, climbing lampposts and hanging out of office windows just to catch a glimpse, to say a silent prayer. There was no riot, no chaos, only a profound, heavy respect, wept by strangers and superstars alike. The procession moved slowly, a stark reminder of the void she left behind. The entertainment world was left reeling. Icons like Jay-Z, Beyonce, and Diddy were visibly shaken, struggling to articulate the magnitude of the loss. It wasn't just that a talented singer had died, it was that the future of pop culture had been rewritten in the worst possible way. She was the bridge between the old school and the new, the muse for producers and designers everywhere. In her absence, there was a palpable sense of what if? What movies would she have made? What songs would she have written? The world didn't just lose Aaliyah, it lost the decades of art she took with her. As the white doves were released into the New York sky that day, the message was clear. An angel had returned home, leaving the world a little less magical than it was before. Decades have passed since the sun set on that tragic day in the Bahamas, yet the light of Aaliyah has never truly faded. In an industry that often chews up its young and spits them out, she remains a pristine memory, untouched by the ravages of time or the decline of age. She is forever 22, forever beautiful, and forever cool. We don't remember her for the scandal that tried to define her youth. We remember her for the grace with which she overcame it. She taught a generation that you could be soft and strong at the same time, that you could whisper and still be heard by the whole world. Her fingerprint is everywhere in modern music. When you hear the atmospheric beats of Drake, the tomboy swagger of Rihanna, or the genre-bending sounds of SZA, you are hearing the echoes of Aaliyah. She was the blueprint for the modern pop star, a multi-hyphenate talent who could dominate the charts in the box office without ever losing her mystery. She didn't just leave behind a catalog of hits, she left a vibe, a feeling that artists are still trying to recreate today. The tragedy of her death is not just in what we lost, but in the realization of what she was about to become. She was on the precipice of global domination, ready to ascend from a star to a legend in real time. Some stories end without closure. The book of Aaliyah was closed halfway through, leaving us with blank pages that we can only fill with our imagination. But perhaps that is her final gift to us. In a world that overshares and overexposes, she remains a beautiful enigma, a one in a million talent who visited us briefly to show us what was possible before returning to the stars. She is the baby girl who never grew old, the angel who flies over the culture, watching the seeds she planted grow into a force. As the credits roll on her life, we are left not with silence, but with the smooth, timeless rhythm of her voice. It is a reminder that life is fragile, that talent is precious, and that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully while we can. If this story took you back to a moment in your past, or if you still remember where you were when you heard the news, please share your memory in the comments below. What is the one Aaliyah song that you will never skip? Let's keep her music playing.